Now, IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde says she's more optimistic about the world economic outlook after a long and sluggish recovery. She implored countries not to retreat from the post-war push for increased trade and cooperation. According to the IMF, the global economic recovery is gaining momentum as businesses ramp up production, though policymakers must guard against imposing new trade barriers. Now, the outlook in advanced economies has improved, driven by stronger manufacturing activity. Meanwhile, higher commodity prices have brought relief to many low-income countries. Now, Daniel Winges joins us in Washington with some insight into next week's spring meetings. Daniel, welcome to the show. Now, of course, as we mentioned earlier, Lagarde hinted that next week, we'll see that 2017 growth prospect report revised upwards. But she also came down hard on what she's calling the sword of protectionism. How do you think this will play on the upcoming discussions in Washington?
Well, I think that IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde is a sophisticated political operator, as well as being the head of this major financial institution. And she knows and understands the politics that's going on in Washington at the moment. She knows that she has to publicly declare a continued commitment to the global system, the global trade situation. At the same time, she has to balance that out with the fact that the Americans are basically the biggest shareholders in the IMF and also play the similar majority role in the World Bank, and that essentially what they have to do is find a way to convince the players to continue their commitments to globalization. And so that will involve a balance of urging a continued commitment, but at the same time, I think much of the, effective diplomacy that will take place behind the scenes, not in sound bites.
Well, Daniel, we know President Trump has pledged in the past to rip up existing U.S. trade pacts. Now, what can we expect from the White House at next week's meetings?
I want to tell you about the makeup of the Trump economic team. There are people in that team that are economic nationalists, that believe in erecting much greater borders to protect American workers. But there are a lot of globalists on the team as well. For example, US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who was at Goldman Sachs for 17 years. And we are told there is much more of a rising star for Gary Cohn, who as well was at Goldman Sachs for about 17 years, and in fact was the co-chief at Goldman Sachs until his resignation to take on a Trump post. So actually what you are seeing here is a narrowing of the field for the economic nationalists as led by the very controversial figure of Stephen Bannon, who's been sidelined very much in the last week or two. So I think that bears a lot of the sort of commentary that will be taking place over the meetings to decipher the runes about just how much support they will be expecting for globalization going forward, although politically, obviously, the Trump administration still needs to continue to beat the nationalist drum.
Well, Daniel, with regards to next week's meetings, we know the IMF is more positive on the global outlook going forward. Do other organizations agree with the IMF and certainly Lagarde's sentiments? Is there a growing consensus that things are improving in the global economy?
The numbers are not yet out, obviously, but she gave this hint that things were looking a little bit up. The closest comparison I can find at the moment is March's economic outlook for the globe, produced by the OECD. And there we saw projections of 3.3% for 2017 globally, and then 3.5% or so for 2018, which is more optimistic than it was in 2016, but is still not sort of buoyant in the way that you would expect the global economy to be at this sort of recovery stage. So the OECD sees a recovery, but not at the pace in which it would like. There are many reasons for that, one of them being productivity, one of them being the risks that they see in the high indebtedness in countries like China, India, where they think that when interest rates go up in the United States and in Europe, some companies and organizations will suffer as a result of that. So there are risks in the economy, but broadly speaking, we're not seeing a major divergence, although in April, as Christine Lagarde comes out with the economic outlook, it looks like they're painting this as a slightly sunnier picture going forward.
Well, many thanks for those insights, Daniel. Daniel Winters joining us there in Washington.